aquaculture, animal health and biotech. I've also got my colleague Alistair with me today. He's from our innovation team, and he will say a few things about our innovation program later at the end of the webinar. We hope to finish sharp at 5 o'clock. So I will have to cut question time short in case we're getting too caught up in our interesting conversation, unfortunately. So the aim of the webinar today is to provide an insight into the skills required for different controlled growing operations and different scales of operation. And we're going to talk about what you need to consider when planning, setting up and running an operation. So as I said, we will be recording the webinar and we will be sharing that afterwards with you and also point you to any resources you might want to consider. There are a couple of programs that are currently open for application that are around leadership and leadership training and rural leadership in particular. So again, we will be sharing links to those afterwards as well. Okay. So without further ado, I want to come to our first speaker, which is Abby Morden. She's a director at Propagate, which is a worker-led collective that specializes in local community and sustainable food projects. She's also the co-founder and grower of the small market garden Hidden Veg, and I think that's what she's going to start off with when she starts her presentation in a second. And because she has a lot of great networks, obviously, in the growing community, she can share insights into different types of CEA setups as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we can hand over to Abby.
Thanks very much. Yeah, as I said a moment ago, I'm a little bit croaky, so excuse me if I give up on speaking a little bit early, but I'll just share my slides here and let me know if it's okay. Is that looking all right?
Yeah, that is great.
Yeah, all good. Great. Okay. So yes, thanks for inviting me along. As Andrea said, I co-run Propagate, which is a worker-led collective, and we specialise in local community and sustainable food projects. I run Hidden Veg. This is not Hidden Veg, I should say. This is East Newmarket Garden. And I also co-founded the Galloway Food Hub, which is a short and local dynamic supply chain that provides an outlet for about 25 different local food producers to the communities of Dumfries and Galloway. I think we cover about a 70 to 80 mile radius at this point. So some of the food producers that I'm going to cover today are suppliers to the Food Hub. So when I was asked to speak on this webinar, kind of the first question I asked myself is, what is controlled growing? I didn't look it up or anything, so it maybe isn't the textbook definition, but I just gave it some thoughts myself, and I thought, well, to me, any kind of food production in a sort of market garden, greenhouse, polytunnel, microgreens kind of setting is to some extent controlled growing. What we're doing as growers is creating the optimum conditions that we want to see for the plants that we want to grow, produce, and presumably sell. So that could be both indoors, it could be outdoors. It's looking at things like soil health. It's looking at the ambient environment, nutrition, at moisture content, etc., etc. So yeah, I think it covers a broad spectrum, and as such, I am going to cover a broad spectrum. As I said, this is East Newmarket Garden, and I've just pinched this picture really from them because it touches on a little bit of everything. I don't know if they do any kind of microgreen production, but they certainly could, and they've got a good selection of both indoor and outdoor production spaces. So here's some examples. I'll kick off with Hidden Veg, which is a market garden that I've been running for the last 4 years. I was told when I first moved to Dumfries and Galloway that you couldn't grow vegetables in Dumfries and Galloway, especially up in the Glen Kens at 80 metres above sea level, where you've got 3 inches of soil on rock. Well, you can, and I have been. So the kind of techniques that I use are integrated pest management. So a good example here is calendula growing alongside the peas. And that is great for attracting sort of lacewings and ladybirds, which are good for eating aphids. So using things like companion planting. that also attracts biodiversity. You'll also see in here I've got some clover, and that's helping to fix nitrogen alongside the peas. So it may look like a happy riot, but to me it's pretty controlled. I also use block planting, so I have about 2 meters. Here's the inside of one of my polytunnels. The inside that's about about 2 meters of a particular crop planted in blocks, and then I'll move on to the next one. So here you can see some chard growing, and then some lettuce further over, and then some things like what's spring onions up here. This was actually year 1 in this particular polytunnel back in 2020. That's the same polytunnel, just a few months later. So yeah, I'm kind of using weed suppressant fabrics, and to my mind, that is a controlled environment. I also use heated propagation benches. This is on the left, not my heated propagation bench, but the one on the right is. So a heated prop bench is essentially heat wires that run the length of the bench with several inches of sand on top of that. There's usually a thermostat controller, and the sort of seed trays are laid out on top of the sand and given a bit of an extra head start. So that sort of kicks things off in sort of February, sometimes January, when it's still cold outside. And I've now transferred all of my seed trays down to either the greenhouse, the polytunnel, or outside. And this particular bench, which is just next door to me actually, is now covered in pepper plants, which will remain in their pots in that environment, because I think that's the best place for them to be. And I'm controlling that space with obviously heat and light, but also with added nutrients from seaweed feed. And the compost that I use is bracken and sheep's wool and comfrey mixed together. Moving on, I've borrowed this example from Locavore. So this is kind of focusing a bit more now on the kind of intensive greenhouse production. Locavore obviously are, I'm sure you all know, are based in Glasgow, and they produce enough veg for, well, about, they don't produce all the veg for 1,500 veg boxes, but they run a veg box scheme with about 1,500 veg boxes. Maybe it's a bit more than that. So they have polytunnels and greenhouses at Bellahouston, which is on the south side of Glasgow. And again, they are using use of membrane and suppression fabrics that's controlling that space, and lots of organic matter in the soil underneath that weed suppressant fabric. So those plants are getting plenty of nutrients. What else have we got? So I did a bit of a shout out across some of our networks, and Phil and Louise shared this with me. So the Upper Bellard in Stirlingshire is a community supported agriculture scheme. I think they produce over about 4 or 5 acres, and they have several indoor spaces. So lots of indoor food production. You can just see the irrigation pipes here laid in. So that's a sort of drip feed irrigation, which means that you haven't got to sort of bother with getting around with a hose pipe. So lots of sort of controlling the kind of water supply to the plants. And this bench again will be a heated propagation bench. So that's kind of use of different types of technology that are appropriate to their environment. And they sent me these pictures as well. So this is what's known as a sort of as a caterpillar tunnel, and it's more of a temporary tunnel, and yeah, it's kind of held down with ropes, and these sort of are slackened off as the year goes on to give more air and light. Just more air to the crops that are growing inside the greenhouse and the polytunnel. So that's a pretty massive space, as you can see, much bigger than mine. Pretty jealous. Where else have we got? So yes, moving from the sort of polytunnels to sort of more of the, I guess, what we might conventionally think of as the controlled growing environments. Salad Brew is one of the producers for the Food Hub, and that's lovely Anne, who runs that operation with her partner Rob. And they use Keeda House, so it's a double span Keeda House, in which they produce tomatoes, salad crops, cucumbers, chilies, using a hydroponic system. It's uses two different types of hydroponic system. One, I've got some notes here. One is the nutrient film technique system, and one is the deep water culture system. I can elaborate on both of those in a moment. So yeah, they only use organic nutrients, and they keep that cycling throughout the system as it goes along. And they don't flush out directly into the environment. It filters through a reed bed, which kind of reduces the impact on the local environment as well, sort of running off slowly into water tanks. This is another view of their greenhouse, as a Akita house. So they do obviously do some growing in soil as well, but all of the tomato and strawberry and chilies and cucumber production is in this kind of hydroponic kind of setup. So what does she tell me about that? Just sift through my notes ever so slightly. So, oh, I've lost it. Yes, so the Dutch variation of NFT, there we go. This is the nutrient film technique system. This is for tomatoes, peppers, aubergines, chilies. And that is a very, very shallow stream of water containing all nutrients required for plant growth, which is circulating between the growing channels and the nutrient reservoir. So the plant roots are contained in the growing channels and are in contact with the nutrient solution. So that's most of the tomatoes, whereas the lettuce is in the deep water culture system, which is where the majority of the plant roots are submerged in a solution containing all essential nutrients, and the crown is supported by a floating raft. So there's your strawberries that they use, and here's her lettuce crops. So yeah, the lettuce seedlings are at this picture about 16 days old. And germination, she says, is much quicker, and cropping can be within about 24 days of planting, which is pretty impressive and certainly a lot faster than in my system, that's for sure. And this is some of her finished products. She said they produce a huge variety of kind of heritage tomatoes, which go down very well with local food hub customers. Another producer on the food hub is Beans Greens Microfarm. This is Lisa. They're based near Moray. I should have said salad brewer based by Cuckoobury. So I'm in Dumfries and Galloway, in case that wasn't obvious already. So Lisa runs Beans Greens Microfarm, which is a microgreen production system. And they use entirely organic seeds. They do grow in compost, but it uses peat-free and organic. And other than that, it is only water that is running through that system. So the system is 15 square meters vertical farm with careful monitoring of temperature and humidity. As you can see, there's fans and lights on every single shelf, and a general fan in the room as well that keeps the air moving. This is actually in their house as well, so fairly small scale. But they do manage to turn over between 250 to 350 units per week, which has allowed her to actually have a full-time job and employ one other person in addition. So yeah, they produce a mixture of peas and sunflowers and radish, kohlrabi, a few other things as well, which I can't remember. But they sell all that via the food hub, either as single crops or as mixes. Here's another nice picture. And they put them into these little punnets, which are then sold via not just the Galloway Food Hub, but also wholesale to cafes and restaurants, which appreciate microgreens on the plate quite a lot, direct to customer, farmers markets, and any other outlet that they can possibly find. Which, yes, as I said, she's managed to make a full-time job for herself out of running that. Very little waste in this system as well, and some of her finished product. So as a conclusion then, I sort of come back to the original point that most sort of food growing environments can be considered to be controlled environments, because to some degree you are controlling various different aspects such as light, water, nutrients, etc. Using things like integrated pest management. This is again back in my polytunnel. That there is no one size fits all, and that any system design needs to be flexible, needs to be resilient, and be able to adapt to its particular environment and circumstances. And that could be not just where you are, but the resources that you've got, including human resources. And I think it's fair to say that all of the projects that I've highlighted also cooperate very closely, work very closely with other food producers, either through things like the Galloway Food Hub, or as in Phil and Louise's case, up in Upper Ballard Farm, they're a community supported agriculture scheme, which means that they have the support and cooperation of the communities that buy their food. So all of that is really important in terms of making a successful enterprise, and certainly important when it comes to controlling the environment. I think that's all from me just now.
Thanks, Abby. That's really great to get an insight from you, and great overview of lots of different operations there. So fantastic. Thank you so much. What I forgot to say at the start is that we're holding all questions till the end once all our presenters have spoken. So hold your questions for Abby, don't forget them, and be ready to ask them later or put them in the chat at any time. I want to head over to Amber now. So Amber is our next speaker. Amber Crowley is a curriculum lead at UHI Argyll and lecturer in horticulture and rural skills. And she will provide us with some information where you can get skills to move from a small scale operation to a more commercial scale. So Amber, if you're ready to share your slides, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll just pop them up now. How's that? Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I am today going to talk about skills that horticulturists require or that help them if they're wanting to upscale their production or their enterprise to a bigger, more commercial enterprise. Just a little bit about me and why I've been invited to speak today. So as Andrea said, I'm a curriculum lead and a lecturer at UHI Argyll. I've been lecturing in horticulture for 12 years. My family have a plant nursery, which is that second picture there. It's a commercial propagation nursery, mainly ornamentals actually, but it's protected crops or controlled growing environment. But they also produce propagules of herbs and wildflowers as well. So I've been in the family business for all my life, really. Started out as child labour, ended up being paid as an adult, as these things go. I am also a garden designer. So having done a biology degree, I actually did a garden design HND at Shruck, or the Scottish Agricultural College as it was called then, and worked for several years as a garden designer, project managing gardens. I've also worked as a horticultural consultant on and off over the years. One of the jobs, that's why there's a nice bottle of gin picture at the top there, Lusser Gin. One of the jobs I did was under a Highlands and Islands Enterprise scheme, where I mentored Lusser Gin to upscale their production, their controlled environment production of botanicals to flavour their gin. They started out as a very small enterprise and were able to grow what they needed on a sort of garden scale, I suppose. And as their gin became more popular and they started to get custom overseas in America and France and all over the place, they suddenly faced a challenge of how do you grow all of these things at a commercial scale on the Isle of Jura. So I worked as a mentor for them, which was really interesting. So I had a little think about what the skills are. Lots of people who are growing have growing skills. They know how to produce their crops. They know what does well. The challenge for upscaling are really in the management skill set, which is maybe a bit less fun than the horticulture growing skill set, because it's the things that you have to do that don't get your hands dirty, that you often have to do when you're wanting to upscale and become more commercial. As an enterprise becomes bigger, you can't do all of the tasks yourself anymore. You very often need to employ people. That could be volunteers, it could be part-time staff, seasonal staff, it could be full-time staff. But as soon as you do that, you have to really up your planning skills to make sure that your staff are efficiently employed, working hard and doing what you need them to do at the right times of year. So workforce planning, hiring the right staff that you need at the right time. Having staff for the appropriate times of year is really important, and training your staff properly is also really important. You might be lucky enough to be able to employ somebody who is already trained, or who has a qualification, for example. But in horticulture, that's not always reliably the case. You don't get enough local people often to enterprises, so that have qualifications or previous experience. So you very often have to train them. And anyway, you need to train them in how your enterprise works and what you do. So you need to be prepared for that your staff will only perform really well if you've got a good training system in place. Even if it's just 1 or 2 members of staff, they'll need ongoing training. The other side of the planning is the production planning, and that's less to do with the people and more to do with the stuff. So your resource management. Do you have what you need in when you need it for your staff to be able to work with it? Do you have the infrastructure that you need for the crops that you're planning in the future? What are your labour requirements? So therefore, what do you need? Not only how many staff do you need and when, but what do you need each of those members of staff to be doing at different times of the year to make sure that you're using those efficiently as well. And often that comes down to actual spreadsheets, Gantt charts, things like that, to make sure that you've got everybody doing what they need to do with the right materials at the right time. You're ordering everything in that you need in time. You're managing to process what you have in time. And for food production, your timescales for cropping are often very tight. So you need to be really on top of the planning. And you also need to be quite dynamic, because even with controlled growing, unless you're in a completely locked down unit where you're using LED lighting, temperature and everything's within your control, very often we're still growing with natural light and a certain amount with natural temperatures. The seasons are variable, and so with the best planning in the world, you still need to adapt to the seasons. For your staff, you need work schedules so they know what they're doing each day, each hour of each day, each week. And you need goals that you set for your staff to work to, so they know the kind of pace they should be working at, what they should have done by what time. Then I've got a little bit here about your sort of policy management. This really is the boring side of growing. Sorry about that, but it's just true. There's a lot of legislative considerations when you start to employ people. You've got all your employment law that you need to be up on. You've got health and safety regulations. You need to get your risk assessments done. You need to make sure everybody's got appropriate PPE. You need to make sure that your staff are working in a healthy environment and a safe environment. You've got food legislation, which if you're producing all ready to sell, you'll know all about, but you need to know the standards. You need to know the labelling requirements. You need to know if you're processing any food, then what needs to be on the labels in terms of ingredients, sell-by dates, and things like that. There's planning and legislation, which could be to do with putting up new polytunnels, for example, or glass houses. Sometimes planning requirements are important for that. And there's environmental legislation. So what are you doing with your waste? Where are you getting your water from? Are you needing to, do you need SEPA permission for your composting system? Do you need SEPA permission for taking waste away? So there's quite a lot of environmental law as well you need to be aware of. Stock control systems. So another thing that you need, I think you might have a mic open somewhere. I've got a little bit of an echo going on. I don't know if other people have got that. Just wondering if everyone could mute their mics
everyone
in the
please
background.
mute themselves.
Oh yeah, that sounds better. Thank you very much indeed. Your stock control. So this is about knowing ahead of time what your likely market is and being able to plan back from that to make sure that you've got the appropriate stock coming along at the right time and in the right quantity to be able to fulfill that market. With a good stock control system, you'll know what stage each of your crops is at, how much of it you have, when it's going to likely be ready for cropping and when it's going to likely be ready for sale. If you have any way of preserving crops and you're selling them in any other kind of processed form, that can make your selling time longer, which gives you a bit more flexibility. But if you're selling a fresh products. I just looking at those microgreens, and they're absolutely great. Their shelf life is tiny, you know, and they're ready over just a few days, and they have to be cropped, cut, sold in those few days. So you do need to make sure you have what you need coming along at the right time to fulfill your market that you're selling to, so that you're a reliable producer and people want to keep ordering from you. Of course, to whatever's within your control, things happen and crops fail, and sometimes things are planted too late, and those things happen. Coming on to marketing, again, being aware of what your markets are and doing enough market research that you know what to grow when it's required and in what quantity. That gives you a really good foundation to know what to do. There's a certain amount of crop that you can grow on the off chance and the hope that it will sell, and a certain amount of crop that you can grow to entice people and say, have a go at this, try this, have you used this before? And that can be really good for growing your markets. But knowing what your customers want and when they want it is really essential to being able to upscale to the point where you are reliable enough that you can have your employees and know that you can have enough money coming in to pay them and have a successful enterprise. When your enterprise starts to get bigger, you start to look less at sort of individually, oh my gosh, we have aphids on the tomatoes right now. What are we going to do that? React to it, do it, move on. You need to start planning on a bigger scale to reduce your overall burden of pests, diseases, and weeds. So this is where the integrated crop management practices come in. And the agriculture industry have actually developed some really sound planning techniques for integrated crop management or integrated pest management, which is the same thing, ICM or IPM, the terms are used interchangeably. And we can apply those techniques to horticulture really well. And actually through government websites, there's planning documents for planning your integrated crop management. And it's getting you to look ahead at what the potential problems are, reflecting on what the problems have been in the past, and how to plan as a whole enterprise, how to reduce your weed, pest and disease burden, which reduces your labour requirements, but it also reduces your need to use pesticides, for example. And so then if you're trying to be proactive about reducing these things from the beginning, so you're making the environment less hospitable to your weeds, pests and diseases, then you're reducing your burden over time, which then reduces the amount that you need to react and the time and cost and damage that does when you do get something occurring. So that's definitely worth upskilling in if you haven't already and investigating. The other things you need to think about, particularly if you have employees as well, is the maintenance of your infrastructure and the management of it. As you upscale and you have more equipment, more infrastructure, more machinery, you need to have the skills within your team for people to be maintaining that and fixing that all of the time, so that it's safe for your employees to work around, but also so it's effective. You don't want to be pulling a machine out the shed in the spring and suddenly realise it was put away with something damaged on it and you now can't harvest your crop with it. So these things need to just get into a cycle of regular maintenance and management. You also, the logistics increase with upscaling. You get more complexity in when you need things delivered in, when things are being delivered out, and the various logistics that sit around all of that. It's about managing those, knowing what you need and when, and knowing what's going out and when, making sure that you have the deliveries booked appropriately at the right times for making sure that things run smoothly. And again, often that sits into spreadsheets and you're sitting there going, right, well, for this crop, we need this much of this and this much of that. And you need to order it in on these dates. And then I need to make sure that this is being delivered out at these times. So I need to book a van or make sure that I've got a driver on that day or whatever it is to make sure your logistics are working around that. When you upscale, the complexity of the finances gets a little bit worse. When you're self-employed and it's just you, it can be very easy to have very, very basic bookkeeping. as soon as you employ somebody, the PAYE comes in, and you need to make sure you're on top of paying wages properly, paying pensions, knowing what your policies are for sick pay, knowing what your hiring and firing regulations are. And alongside that, of course, you need to then keep on top of your income and your outgoings, what taxes you should be paying, should you be in what way should you be registered as a business, should you be VAT registered or not, and keeping on top of cash flow. And cash flow is very tricky in any seasonal business. Some people manage their cash flow quite effectively if they're able to get seasonal workers, because the biggest outlay will always be on labour. And if you're able to get seasonal workers because you live in a place with a high enough population, or you have locals who like seasonal work, that can work really well, because you're employing when your cash is coming in. But it's not always possible to get good, reliable, long-term staff on a seasonal basis. So sometimes you need permanent staff, and then you just have to have enough money in your pocket, under your mattress, or hopefully in the bank, to be able to pay them through the winter as well, when you don't have so much income. The other side of that is to consider what you're cropping and when, and what crops could be bringing money in over the winter. Could you do something around Christmas? Could you do something that brings in some money around winter events, that helps with the cash flow? You'll have a certain amount of customer service to do, of course, and as your customer base grows, as your enterprise grows, it can become quite burdensome to keep your customers happy. If you've got any kind of retailing going on, that becomes very, very much at the forefront. If you're wholesaling, you have fewer customers, and so it's a little bit easier to handle. But you do have to bear in mind, if you're wholesaling and you maybe have even 10 or 20 good-sized customers, if you lose one of those, you lose 10 or 20% potentially, or 10 or 5% of your income, which is massive. So customer service has to be really top notch to keep your customers happy, keep them buying from you, keep them coming back every year. If you can get long-term customers, they could be restaurants, it could be a growing hub, it could be veg boxes, whatever it is. But if you get long-time repeat customers who want a similar sort of thing at the same sort of time every year, that gives you such a good basis for upscaling, because you know what you want. They give you an absolute base. You know that money's going to come. It's predictable. Then you can start to experiment on top of that with new lines, new markets, and whatever else you're looking for. I've just got security in there as one at the bottom. Sometimes site security is an issue. Vandalism can be an issue. And as you start to increase and you have potentially more staff on site, security can be an issue, just of people's belongings, cars, things like that. So it's worth bearing in mind, depending where your site is, what your security concerns are. But of course, it's up to you as an owner or a manager of an enterprise, that your staff and that your products are all in a safe environment. So how do you gain these skills? If you're looking at this list and there's anything on there and you're thinking, actually, I don't know very much about that, or I'm not very confident in that area or in several of those areas, what can you do about it? So obviously I'm from UHI, University of Highlands and Islands, and we have various courses that you can come on. There are other courses available. You can do courses with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Business Gateway have some great stuff. If you're in Central Scotland region, SRUC, Scotland's Rural College, have some great courses as well. I'm just going to give you an overview of what courses look like at different levels, so that you know what to look for if you're wanting to upskill by getting a qualification or doing a course. And then I'm just going to very briefly talk about what we offer at UHI, which is Scotland-wide, just in case it suits what anyone would like to do. So just a very brief overview of what you might be looking for. These are the Scottish levels, and some people may not have been in education for a while, so this might not look like what it looked like when you were in your education. But just so you know what you're looking for if you're looking for a course, levels 1 to 4 are your really sort of basic practical and very little theory courses for people who are wanting to learn how to grow like literally how do you prune a plant, how do you pot up a plant, how do you make a cutting, really quite introductory horticulture skills. Levels 5 and 6 are a little bit more advanced in the practical side. You'll be learning how to maintain machinery, how to do a little bit more advanced propagation techniques, and a bit more of the theory, introducing the science behind horticulture. And that would get people ready for employment, where they would go in as a sort of manual worker or labourer in a nursery setting. Level 7 is first year of degree equivalent, that's HNC level. And this is where you're starting to look at business startup skills, much stronger into the scientific theory of what's going on behind plant growth. Why do plants grow like they do? How does photosynthesis work? How are crops uptaking nutrients? Why do crops perform better in some soils than others? Why do some soils hold water better than others? How do plants react to different temperatures? You know, that sort of scientific theory, as well as continuing to build practical skill. Level 8 is HND level, which would be the equivalent to a second year of a degree, and that's really advanced practical skills for sort of specialist methods, things like specialist propagation methods, air layering and things like that, and getting properly into scientific research skills. And level 8 is where the management skills really come in. So that's where starting to look at how do you start up a business and run a practical business like at level 7, but at level 8, how do you manage a business? How do you manage people? How do you manage a workforce? How do you manage resources? And within that is legislation, health and safety legislation, employment law and things like that. Above that, you've got level 9 and 10, which is degree and honours degree. Level 11, which is master's. Level 12, which is a doctoral degree. At UHI, we run in horticulture from level 4 to level 8, both college-based, which is the route at the top, in schools, which is in the middle there, and then at the bottom, work-based, which is where we have apprentices who are based out at businesses. They're working and studying at the same time, and our assessors go out and check on the workers and how they're coming along and sign off what they're doing. So apprentices are a really good way of building a workforce, because they're under structured training, which is the skills that they need is chosen by the employer. And they say, I need my apprentices to be able to do these things. Then between the employer and the college, we help to build and develop those skills. And although I'm seeing Andrew looking quizzically, they're learnt on site at their employment. And then they're assessed by a lecturer coming in who supports them with their written work, basically, and assesses how they're getting along. And that means that the apprentice gets qualification as they go along. So a modern apprenticeship, for example, get an SVQ2 or an SVQ3. Also, there are potential funding for having apprentices, and there's a different wage rate for apprentices as well, which is sometimes quite favourable for the employers. What I'm going to point out to you in particular in the next slide are the two top ones that are highlighted in yellow, which is the HNC and the HND, which are most appropriate to people who are already in horticulture but looking to develop their knowledge. And apologies for this busy slide, but these will get sent out to you after, so you can read through them if you want to. But I just wanted to point out one or two potentially useful things if anybody's thinking that they want to upskill. So in our HNC horticulture level 7 on the left, we have a production horticulture unit, which looks at different industry sectors, the infrastructure requirements for them. And then during that unit, so this is one sort of module or unit within the wider course, you can, our fire alarm's just gone off. I'm hoping that it's a test. I'll give it another second. Is it really loud for you? Can you hear it? No, good.
It's not actually that loud. It's just I'm conscious of time, Amber. Would you mind wrapping this up?
This is my last slide. I will be about.
Okay.
1 minute. Oh, it's gone off. I think
Great.
it was a test. Excellent. So you could study production horticulture, for example, and just be with us a couple of hours a week and do an individual unit in any of our HNC or HND courses, but we have particular ones that are really suited to growers. So production horticulture in the level 7. And then in the level 8, we have a professional skills, professional practice unit and applied horticultural research, which is really useful for anyone who's wanting to learn how to scientifically investigate what their crops are doing and how they're growing. And we also have a sustainability and innovation unit, which looks at how you take what your practice is at the moment and make it more innovative and more sustainable. So on to the last slide there. I've just got any questions, please pop them in the chat or ask at the end. I've got my email address on there as well, if anybody wants to get in touch and talk about anything really horticultural or anything that's going on at the university. Very happy to talk to you about it. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amber. That's fantastic. That was a great insight into the skills landscape as well. So I'm conscious of time, so Amber's colleague Andrew is here as well, and he's kind of the specialist in growing mushrooms and setting up a retail operation. So we're very happy to take any questions around those areas too, but I won't be able to give him the time to speak right now because I'd rather go to Tara, our last speaker. Sorry, I've got a dog barking in the background now as well, which is probably quite bad, so apologies for that. But I'd like to hand over to Tara from the Land Workers Alliance to tell us a little bit more about the Land Workers Alliance Market Garden Skills Program. So sharing your slides already, perfect. Handing over to you.
Is that working for my slides?
Yeah, we can see your slides in the PowerPoint presentation. I can't see it as full screen yet.
Sorry, my computer's being slow. It doesn't like Microsoft Teams. Just give me a second. Great. Okay. Yeah. I'm the policy and campaigns coordinator for the Land Workers Alliance. I'm actually filling in for my colleague today who's on annual leave, so she was more involved in running the training network that I'm going to talk about. But
sorry to interrupt, Tara. I can't actually see your slide at the moment. I don't know if anyone else can see it. I can just see.
I can't. No.
Click to exit full screen. That's what I see.
Can you see it there?
Yeah, we can see it in the PowerPoint. Yeah, you could always just go with that.
It's not full screen.
I think I might have to go with that because when I go to full screen, you seem to not be able to see it anymore. Sorry about that. Yes, so I'm from the Land Workers Alliance, and for those who don't know so much about the work that we do, we're a union for farmers, growers, crofters, foresters, and other land-based workers who are interested in building a better food and farming system. And about a third of our members are involved in growing fruit and vegetables mostly for kind of local markets, so commercially growing fruit and vegetables. So it's quite a big proportion of our membership is involved in, I suppose, what we can call controlled growing, but very specifically for production of fruit and vegetables, often at quite small scales. As a union, we do a mixture of different things. So we do a lot of campaigning around different issues that affect our members, trying to get better support for farmers and growers who are working in agroecological ways, for example. And we also do a lot of more kind of networking events. You know, we have gatherings, opportunities for our members to share skills with each other in a kind of informal setting. But what I'm going to talk about today is more specifically our market garden training network, which we developed over the course of last year to fill some of the gaps that we were seeing in the training landscape for production of fruit and vegetables. So yeah, one of the kind of key challenges that our members struggle with is finding training which prepares them for a career in small-scale fruit and veg production in Scotland. While there are some courses in horticulture more generally, when it comes to sort of market garden, well, really fruit and veg production at various different scales, there isn't much formal training available when it's looking specifically at fruit and veg production. There's some accredited training has started to be available in the south of England now, but a lot of the conditions for growing things, that just the kind of some of the practicalities are completely different there than they are here, as well as some of the kind of economic context that people are working in. There's a lot of reasons why it's quite a different situation in Scotland, and there's very limited places on those courses because they're so new and they're so oversubscribed. So this is one of the kind of key issues that we're finding is we've got lots of people who really want to grow, they want to be market gardeners, they want to grow vegetables for their local community. They want to be contributing to a sort of sustainable local food system, but it's really hard to work out how to get into that in the first place. And most of the training that we actually see happening in this area is very kind of on an ad hoc basis. People will get a sort of entry-level job and they'll be trained on the job, but it will be very specific to the place that they're working. They won't get any kind of certificate or proof that they've had that training for going on to another job. Sometimes what is called training can end up being quite exploitative because people who haven't had training aren't paid that much, but actually the people who are employing them don't have the time or the capacity to offer a really good training program. And there's no kind of control, like quality control of what training people have, because none of it is formalised. So this is a big issue that our members have been struggling with, and it comes up again and again. We also have lots of members who offer training themselves, but feel like they don't have the capacity, to offer it to the standard that they would like to offer it to, because they're trying to run a business, and there's nowhere for them to kind of refer their employees. They've got to do all the training themselves, and that can be a bit of an overwhelming burden, especially in the middle of a growing season. So that was kind of the situation where we started off from. Last year we ran our first pilot training network. So the idea behind this was to form a network of some different market gardens that were already running some sort of training program themselves, but network them with each other so that across the different market gardens we could offer a much more comprehensive training program that covered a lot of different skills that were relevant to people who are looking for a career in edible horticulture. The 6 market gardens that took part are all in the east of Scotland, which was partly just because it was easier for a pilot project to work with people who were in kind of the same area, but we're hoping that this can expand and, for example, include people like Abby, who in future kind of iterations of the training program. And the 6 market gardens that were involved all use slightly different techniques for growing things. They've got different setups. They have different business models, different specialisms. They sell, some sell through veg box schemes or community supported agriculture projects, and others sell to restaurants, for example. So, there's a lot of different business models as well as different growing systems that are being employed. So this gave the trainees a chance to see a much wider range of different ways that you can do this kind of growing, basically, and have a kind of well-rounded training. We had 17 trainees who took part in the first round of this kind of pilot course last year. And there was various different things that came under this kind of heading of training. One of the key things was on-farm workshops. So where all the trainees would go to one of the 6 market gardens and learn about a particular topic for a whole day, and there would be quite a lot of practical skills development, a lot of opportunity for asking questions, very kind of like hands-on. And there were different topics on the different market gardens according to the specialism of the people who were running those market gardens. There's also quite an element of peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, so that we formed a kind of core cohort of the trainees who were able to do a lot of kind of discussion and working together. And the other aspect, which ties in with some of what Amber was talking about, was that we offered some online training as part of this. There was regular online training that looked at more kind of the business aspects, planning, how to market your produce, different methods, different sales structures that you might like to look at. I suppose maybe start not so much for scaling up, but for really starting people from the beginning. You know, when you go about building a business, what does that look like? Because often people are really enthusiastic about growing, but haven't got skills in marketing, for example. So we try to integrate that through the whole process so that it's it was a kind of a core part of it. And that took place over the summer last year, the course. In the long term, we're really hoping that we can develop an accredited and fully funded training programme. So it's worth saying, we had some funding from the Scottish Government's Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund, which helped fund the first year's pilot scheme, and covered facilitation and covered time for the people who were helping to run the differences that of it. And that was really helpful. We're hoping in the long term that we can have a fully funded programme where the burden is not on the trainees to be able to pay for themselves, because you know that really does limit who is able to take part in this. And it's really important that this is accredited so that people at the end of it can come out and say, you know, I really do definitely have those skills. I've got the certificates to show it. You know, fitting into that level system that Amber was talking about, potentially with different levels available, different levels of accreditation available. And that is really important to make sure that we're not seeing people being exploited and that we are developing, you know, a workforce of people who are able to go on and start their own market gardens or work for other people in a really, you know, useful and productive way. And it's worth saying that from last year's cohorts, most of them have gone on to have jobs that either working for other people, or we've had a few people who've gone on already to set up their own market gardens or to take over running existing market gardens themselves. And we've had other people who have gone on to work in kind of like slightly, kind of full-time positions within existing market gardens. So it has been really successful in terms of helping people to make that kind of next step with their career. What we're doing at the moment is that the pilot programme is being evaluated by Lantra with the help of ECOS, so that we can actually see what went well, have some kind of external evaluation of that. They're looking as well at the need for this, and they've been interviewing everyone who took part, and both the people involved in the training and the trainees themselves. And we've had really, really positive feedback so far. We're expecting the report soon, but people have been really positive about how useful it was. And then we're hoping that Lantra are going to help us to develop a kind of more official accreditation scheme, and we'll look at the potential to tie it in with that modern apprenticeships, for example, which at the moment are available in horticulture but don't really work in the context of fruit and vegetable production. So looking at how we could make that route available to people as well. So there's different options that we're going to explore with Lantra for how we can scale this up. We were really hoping this year that we'd be able to run a similar programme again, but the funding was going to come through the Scottish Government's New Entrants Training Fund, which has run out of money and hasn't been announced again yet. So we are actually at the moment, we're running the on-farm workshops as kind of standalone courses rather than running the whole programme while we carry out the evaluation and work to develop it for next year. But we're hoping that next year we'll be running it at a slightly larger scale and with a full programme, new and improved following the evaluation. I think it's just worth saying as well for folk who are wanting to get into this kind of growing, there are obviously a lot of other broader issues. It's not just about access to training, although that is really important. There are also, there's really big issues around access to land, funding for startup funding is really difficult to access. Rural housing is also a big issue that some of our members struggle with. So we do other work within the Land Workers Alliance to campaign around those issues, and also to develop networks where, you know, our members can support each other. So if you are interested in getting involved in growing, whether that's fruit or veg or other types of growing, and you want to be part of a kind of member-led network where we can have some peer support, then please do get in touch or join us or come along to one of our events or something. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Tara. That's great to get an insight into your program, and it really sounds like a great program. I think Johan from Knockfarrow Produce had talked very positively about it before, so it's great to hear a little bit more about it. So thank you everyone for your great presentation. So I'm just gonna open the floor now to any questions from the audience. So it could be obviously to any of our speakers.